Well, welcome. I think we're right at time. So, with our producer Dave's permission, I'm going to go ahead and start. Dave, we good to go?
You're all set, Sean. Go ahead.
All right, thank you. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar today. Today is the first webinar in a series, and we're so excited to have you here. The webinar is the Introduction to Community Violence Prevention and Intervention, where we're going to be chatting a little bit about strategies and about different technical assistant resources for out-of-school time professionals. I would like to introduce myself. I am Sean Petty. I have many different titles, but my official title on this project is Senior Learning Specialist, but I am a Senior Associate with the NTAC, and so I'm so excited to be here. And I'm joined by my amazing colleague, Michelle Owens. Michelle, you want to take a second to say hi and introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Sean. Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle Owens. We're really excited to have you here today. With NTAC, I am a TA liaison and also work in the training and with our advisory council and our partnerships. So we're really happy to have our special guests today as our partners. So there you go, Sean.
Perfect, thank you. Couple of housekeeping before I introduce our special guests, couple of housekeeping tips. We are utilizing the chat function very actively, so if you have a question or if you have a thought or just wanted to say hi, feel free to use the chat. We are monitoring it. If you do have a very specific question, you're like, just answer this sometime, you can put that in the Q&A side of things and we'll get around to that as well. If you have any technical difficulties, Dave Mazza is on the line. He is our producer, and he will take care of all your technical concerns, and he will make sure that we stay on time as well. And speaking of time, we have an individual who has joined us whose time is super precious, and we love the fact that she is spending it with us because this is a topic that she's very passionate about. She is our leader and has guided us to focus on this series. She works for the U.S. Department of Education. It's none other than Dr. LaShonda Scroggins, who is the 21st Century Community Learning Center's group leader. Dr. Scroggins, how are you today?
I'm doing well, thank you. It's great to join everyone this afternoon, this morning, wherever you are.
We are so excited to have you. We're going to turn the time over to you to set us up for success today.
Great, thanks, Sean. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, wherever you are. Welcome to the first webinar in our six-part series on community violence prevention and intervention. This series represents a critical step toward equipping our out-of-school time professionals with the tools and resources needed to support students, families, and communities facing violence. As Sean indicated, this is an area that's very near and dear to my heart. I taught in DC, and just knowing, what students and families go through on a day-to-day basis and the supports needed, this is an area that the department felt like we should definitely give some attention to. So it's my pleasure for them to be able to present this to you today. Because community violence, as we all know, deeply impacts youth, families, and entire neighborhoods, and they leave emotional, physical, and economic scars that can last generations. The Department of Education recognizes the critical role of addressing these challenges as a part of a safe and supportive learning environment for all of our students. The out-of-school time programs like those in the 21st CCLC network are uniquely positioned to support this mission by providing safe spaces, resources, and strategies that are preventative to reduce the impact of violence and promote resilience in communities. The strategies and content we're sharing in this series are the result of collaborative work across various technical assistance centers. These partnerships create a strong, interconnected ecosystem of support for youth and communities, pulling together the tools, expertise, and resources that are crucial for impactful community violence prevention. By connecting these resources with the out-of-school time field, we are building a comprehensive support system that uplifts youth and offers sustainable solutions. Additionally, we will elevate stories from 21st CCLC professionals across the country who have embodied the spirit of collaboration from local educational agencies to community-based organizations and beyond to share their successful strategies. Throughout this series, we will dive into the impacts of violence, strategies for prevention, and the power of partnerships in preparing our communities. Our SCAs, subgrantees, and all stakeholders will gain insights into creating environments that help to prevent violence and foster resilience. We all have a role in preventing community violence and creating safe, supportive environments for our youth. So I encourage you to engage, share, and take away valuable lessons from this series, knowing that each of us is part of a greater network working together to make a difference. Thank you for joining us today, and I will turn you back over to Sean.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Scroggins, for your words and your guidance. I love the fact that you come directly from the field as well. And so you have seen the impact of things in DC and in your work, and now are guiding us on a national level. We appreciate your time. We know you're a very busy individual, but the fact that you're here to set the stage. And you said something that I really liked that I just want to point out. You said, all this series is here to help foster resilience. What a powerful word, resilience. We will focus on that today and make sure that folks are empowered to do that. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the webinar series.
So we're going to go ahead and bring back our slide deck here. And I'm going to ask my colleague, Michelle, we have a mission and a vision at NTAC. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Sure, Sean. So at NTAC, our vision is we really want to be able to provide professionals in the field the knowledge and skills that they need in order to implement, programs. Also, the vision to engage and empower students, and not only the students that we work with, but also their families, so that we're, giving them the opportunity to have success in the future and be lifelong learners. Our mission at NTAC is one, to provide resources. We want to be able to give best practice resources, also opportunities for 21st century program staff to have opportunities for professional development. And then lastly, to build the capacity of 21st century programs.
So I love that mission of building capacity, because it kind of aligns with that also fostering resilience that Dr. Scroggins said. And I know that the way we do this is through some priorities. So what are the priorities of NTAC?
Thanks, Sean. So we have 7 priority areas at NTAC that we are working with. And these 7 areas are based on the guidance from the department, from Dr. Scroggins and her team, and what we have learned from the field, what we have gathered from 21st century professionals that they need help with. Our main priority, like I said, is to build the capacity of 21st century programs. We really want to work in all of these different areas to build that capacity. And as you see here, off of the 7 priorities is us providing professional development and technical assistance in the programmatic areas, and then also in the student-focused areas. So Sean, I'm going to ask you, where does community violence prevention and intervention fall into supporting these priorities for us?
That's a great question. And I'm going to sound like I'm taking a test. I'm like, it affects them all, right? Because if you really think about it, it does. But I would say, obviously, it has a big piece in the build capacity and the support students SEL. I would also say, along with equity. And there is both a programmatic side and a student-focused side. And so in this series that we're focused on, we have put together 6 webinars, and it's even more than a webinar. You could say it's more of the development of an ecosystem around this idea of community violence prevention and intervention. So we have 6 specific webinars that we plan to host where we're going to have guests and special technical assistance centers coming in and experts from the field sharing a little bit. We'll start with our first one today, and you can see the cycle that we're going to go all the way to the one that I know, Michelle, I know you and I are super excited about, and that is number 6, which is going to be hopefully a youth-led session where we amplify youth voices and talk about how youth can do leadership in community safety and in this effort. So from the mouth of babes, so to speak, we're going to see that actually happen. So as we talk about this, though, Michelle, I have to ask, what is community violence? Like, is there like a definition or something that we can kind of hang our hats around?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think Dr. Scroggins really touched on this as she was within her opening remarks and talked about the impacts of community violence, referencing when she was a teacher in DC and, just some of the work that the department is really focused on in community violence. And so community violence is something that happens between unrelated individuals who may or may not know each other. So you just don't know. And generally, this is happening away from either the student or the adult's home. Some examples of this that you'll see on the screen are assaults or fights among groups and shootings in public places. Also, in schools and on the streets. Some common types of community violence that are affecting our youth, things that we're seeing within our schools and within our after-school programs are bullying, gang fights, shootings in public areas, and also in all the areas and environments that the students that we serve, go to, parks and other areas. We can always anticipate some types of traumatic events, but community violence can happen suddenly and without warning. So we might be able to, like where I live in North Carolina, I can anticipate a hurricane. I'm getting a warning that it's coming, but maybe not something that's happening specific in my community. And then also youth and families, we find out that, they live within the community violence. And oftentimes, they are always feeling fear and harm can happen to them. And so this really gives a lot of the youth that we serve a feeling of being unsafe. And also it can be very frightening.
So I know as we were working on putting this together, this particular quote from the Youth Violence Prevention Center really hit home with you. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Sure. Thanks, Sean. I think that the reason it really hit home with me or like really impacted me is because this quote comes from an editorial that was co-authored by youth themselves. So even though this quote was something that an adult wrote out, it's coming from youth voice. And I think if you read the quote, you can feel, the youth frustration. And then the end of it really comes to me as I think of it as a question that's coming in from them as how can adults say that interpersonal violence is created by the youth themselves? So they're feeling like it's being thrown back at them. And I think it's really important to know that interpersonal violence that they're speaking of involves intentional use of physical force or power against other people or individuals. And so I think it's important. And like you said, that last webinar that we do, hopefully we do have the youth and have a panel, because listening to youth and really considering the root causes that increase their exposure to violence is very important. And they may not call it structural and systematic injustice, but I think that they're constantly feeling what is happening and being played out in their communities and can really help support adults in prevention and intervention strategies.
So, it's powerful. On the screen right now is some of the effects of community violence on youth, and you shared some of these stats with me. What is this 15,000 number?
So the 15,000 number is 15,000 youth and young adults lost their lives to homicide in 2021. So it's a very large amount of our youth. And then the other one is the second cause of death for youth ages 10 to 24 is homicide. And it's also really, I think, something that stands out for us to see those numbers. And then Sean, can you share with us, what it says down here about data for high school students?
Sure, I found this very interesting. So Michelle and I chatted through this, and she did a lot of the research, and her expertise shared this. And this just really hit home with me that the 2021 data for high school students, 18% of high school youth were involved in not just a fight, an argument, but a physical altercation that actually took place. 18%, that's 1/5 almost, of students. And then 15% were bullied in school. And that's, bullied can be a very all-encompassing term, but still 15% is an all-encompassing number. That's crazy. But what really shocked me were 5% of high school students in 2021 carried a firearm, not for the purpose of hunting or sports, but carried a firearm for protection or other purposes. And that was just, I was like, wow, 5%. That means, 1 in 5, or excuse me, that's just a crazy number for me. I just couldn't believe it. So along with this effect comes an impact, and there's something called ACEs. What is that? What is ACEs?
Well, ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And this is something that when I was a special education teacher and a school counselor in middle school, we didn't really have this information of what ACEs are. I mean, we saw the effects of it, but we didn't know what it was. And so ACEs are negative experiences that are happening to youth 0 to 17 years old. And most of the time, these experiences are traumatic events, and they may lead to things such as mental health conditions in the future, chronic physical health conditions, substance use disorders. And so you see here, these are a lot of different things that could be happening in the youth that we serve in out-of-school time programs that we might not know about. They might end up coming to us and we have no idea what's happening to them in their homes or in their communities. And so these are the things that are very important for us to always take into consideration when we are looking about talking with our youth.
And I know we have some additional information about ACEs. We have a resource handout that we'll be putting in the chat and that we'll be sharing in the replay when it comes out. That will take you to a specific video and some other resources around this to expand more. But when we connect all this together, what can out-of-school time programs like the 21st CCLC network and programs do to help with this critical area?
Well, I think out-of-school time programs can engage their community members. They really want to engage community members that have experienced violence, including the youth, because we want them to be part of the prevention planning, implementation, and evaluation process. I think also out-of-school time programs can really work to educate youth. We want to build communication skills. We want to build their emotional awareness and really build coping and problem-solving skills, similar to what you and Dr. Scroggin touched on about resilience. They can also support street outreach programs and activities, partner with schools to make sure that there are safe routes to and from school. And then I also think providing supervision, we know between all of the different research that comes out about supervision between 3 to 6 p.m. and how important it is and really impacts that the fact that youth crime and violence is highest during that time.
And 3 to 6, that's our sweet spot for out of school. So thank you so much. We are going to, this was kind of us setting the stage for our discussion today. So thank you, Michelle, for walking us through some of that background data and information. we would like to now transition a little bit to more of a discussion based, almost kind of like a interview style. So we have a series of guests today that we're going to interview who have hands-on experience with everything that we're talking about. And the very first one we're going to start off with just happens to also be Michelle and my leader, so to speak. So we're bringing onto the stage Dr. Candace Ferguson. Dr. Ferguson is actually the leader, the team leader, the project director of our 21st Century National Technical Assistance Center, which we work for and is providing this great resource. But the amazing thing is, Dr. Ferguson actually comes from the field where she tackled this, and her background is in juvenile justice and intervention and prevention strategies overall. So, hi, Dr. Ferguson, how are you?
Hi, Sean. Hi, everybody. I'm great, and I'm so glad to be here, finally being able to speak about this important topic that, as you know, really touches on not only my experience, but my passions.
So, so in full disclosure to the full audience, I've worked with Dr. Ferguson for a long time, even when she was in the state in field. And today we kind of want to pull upon her expertise to chat a little bit about prevention and intervention strategies, specifically how they can be integrated into state level priorities, particularly programs such as 21st Century. So, Dr. Ferguson, you have and I'm not trying to date you or anything. I'm just trying to show your breadth of experience. But you have 25 years of experience in local and state, federal roles, nonprofit roles. So you bring a really interesting, multifaceted perspective to this work. Your work's covered areas such as dropout prevention, juvenile justice, and other innovative projects. And you've constantly focused on prevention, and then, if prevention doesn't work, the intervention side.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share a little bit about how your focus on prevention has worked across your different roles? And specifically, we'd love to hear what you did during your time as a 21st Century Community Learning Center's state leader in Texas, and how you position prevention as like a critical strategy there.
Sure. And I appreciate you not dating me, but also giving me an opportunity to kind of talk about my experiences and how that led to where we are today. But specifically, as you mentioned, in my role as a former state educational agency coordinator for Texas's 21st Century program, which they call Texas ACE, that was well more than a decade ago. It was that, but really my past experience in juvenile justice that really did help me to see the value of prevention and intervention and just how crucial these strategies are to support the entire community. And what I mean by the entire community is the school community, of course, the juvenile justice community, because really, if you think about it, in this community we speak of, we're all serving the same students and the same families, whether they are in school, whether they're participating in an out-of-school time program, or even if they're incarcerated youth. So if I can, I'll share a little bit about my background. And really, for me, it started early in my career. When I was in college, I was a criminal justice major. And at the time, I also worked for an after-school program for a nonprofit. I was an after-school site coordinator. So that was really my entry into the out-of-school time world. And at the time I worked for a nonprofit. It wasn't a 21st Century program, but we served economically disadvantaged students. So like I said, that was kind of my first entry into the out-of-school time space. But when I graduated, I became a juvenile probation officer. And so at the very beginning of my career in juvenile justice, my goal and my position really focused on prevention. And so in that space, I worked closely with the students, of course, who were on probation. And at this time, they were on probation for minor offenses. Think of, traffic violations, Class C misdemeanors, those types of offenses, and even the offenses that they would have received in school at the time. And so I worked with those students, and of course, I worked with their families. I worked with their teachers and their school administrators, and also with community partners to help bring the resources to many of these students often many of them were in rural communities. I've seen folks here in the chat mention some of the issues that they're facing as well in rural communities, or even if they're not facing those issues, they're trying to prepare for them. And that is so critical because as we know, and I've heard people in the chat say this, that this community of violence affects us all, no matter where we are. And unfortunately, we've seen that too many times. And so I say all that just to kind of give you a little bit of perspective about, how I started to look at things in terms of prevention and intervention, and specifically so that these students that we were working with wouldn't get further involved in the juvenile justice system. And so I'll shift gears just a little bit because that's how I started my career. I was still in juvenile justice, so my role shifted a little bit. And I went from prevention to then supervising youth who were on parole from the juvenile justice system at the time. We called it the Texas Youth Commission here, and this was many years ago. But essentially, I went from working in prevention to working with these youth who were released from the Youth Commission on juvenile parole. And I worked with them and supported them either until they were discharged from the juvenile justice system. And again, at the time, that could be when they were 21 years old. And you can imagine the host of issues that brought along with that as well in terms of age. And so I worked with them when they were on parole, or unfortunately, and again, many times I saw this, that they would either phase out of the juvenile justice system or unfortunately move into the adult criminal justice system. And so literally it was working with youth from one spectrum in prevention to the other. And that's what really showed me how critical these prevention efforts really are, because in many cases we could deter them from that future justice system involvement. And I know I'm going to get to your question kind of in a roundabout way.
No worries. It's good to hear the history and the background and set the stage.
Yeah. And so I wanted to add that, like, all of that really is what gave me the perspective, because you asked about my specific experience as the 21st CCLC state coordinator in Texas. And that perspective is really where I drew from while I was in Texas and in that role. And one critical thing that we did that that I think is so important. But one critical thing that I did when I left the juvenile justice field is that I maintained those relationships with my juvenile justice partners. And it was really through just maintaining those relationships that I was invited to attend a conference that they were putting on. At the time, it was called Mental Health in Schools Conference. And this was it was either around 2011 or 2012. And it's the first time I ever learned about trauma and ACEs. And like Michelle was saying, that had such a profound effect on me. It was like a light bulb went off, because I wish I had known that information when I was a juvenile probation and parole officer, because I know it would have changed the way that I dealt with many of the youth that I was dealing with. And so it was after that conference that I attended, I was, like I said, a light bulb came on, and I saw a way that we could merge, these efforts both in out of school time with juvenile prevention and intervention. And so as someone at the time who could influence policy and practice in my state, and I think if we have other state coordinators who are on, the call with us today, or folks who are in this position that can do something similar, here's a little way in which you can do that. So what we did, and this was for those folks who may be familiar in Texas, this was cycle 8, so it was several years ago. But we included in our request for application what we called a targeted behavioral intervention pilot program, if you will. And essentially, we gave priority points to those organizations that, included partnerships with disciplinary alternative education programs, juvenile justice alternative education programs, and juvenile justice centers. So this partnership in these applications, we gave priority points to. So that was kind of one way that we were able to influence policy. and practice, which you're going to hear about before too long.
Thank you so much for setting the stage and for sharing your background, which led to you having a really good understanding, so to speak, because you have hands-on experience, you know, all the way from working with students who were caught up in the system, so to speak, for misdemeanors or for minor offenses, to those that were on parole, to your work as a state leader, and then running this initiative in Texas that focused on priority points for this initiative, which led to our guest today, which we're going to get to. But before I have our guest, I just kind of wanted to end kind of our section of this webinar today by asking you a question that kind of brings it all together, and that is, in your work with these organizations, like all the way from the time you started to the national work that you do even today, you know, what strategies have you found to really be the most effective in identifying or addressing various concerns for youth? What could you share with those online that you have found that, gosh, really works?
I mean, I think the biggest one, and you'll hear about it from our presenters today, but it's partnerships, because partnerships are really at the cornerstone of what we do in education. But as I said previously, and really, it's regardless of the field that you may find yourself in, whether you're in education, health and wellness, juvenile justice, or even public safety, we're all working with and for the same students, the same families, and the same communities. So if you think about that from like a well-rounded perspective, it's not just one agency, it's not just one organization, it's all of our collective responsibility to move this work forward, and partnerships is really the way to go about doing that. And, you know, we have so many dedicated organizations that serve this same population. And we can't forget about our faith-based organizations too, because they're critical. But they make, you know, again, this kind of collective responsibility that make these partnerships essential to the work. So as I mentioned, today you're going to hear strategies from one LEA and 2 different community-based and or nonprofit organizations, as well as that partnership with a juvenile justice center that have figured this out. And they're going to help give you strategies and tips and talk about their experiences with this type of collaboration. As I mentioned, all for, at the end of the day, preventing and intervening in acts of violence, and really more than anything, preventing youth from going down that path. So I think that's probably the biggest thing I can say is I look forward to you all hearing about these collaborations and these partnerships, because they truly are critical.
Well, thank you, Dr. Ferguson. And I'm a little off script, but I'm going to tell a quick little tidbit. I remember when I first started working with Dr. Ferguson a few years ago, and she approached and she said, "Sean, we need to do this in 21st century. We need to really have this focus." And she's like, "I want you to go visit these various different organizations across the state." And I was asking myself, I'm like, why is Dr. Ferguson sending me to this juvenile justice center over here, and this alternative school program over here, and this faith-based organization over here? I should just be focusing on 21st century and just doing this. But gathering all that data allowed us to come back and really focus on intervention, but more importantly, on prevention. And that led us to the programs that we have today. And I know that the current state coordinator of Texas, Sarah Daly, has maintained that focus as well. So thank you, Dr. Ferguson, for your time and for setting the stage and helping us build on Dr. Scroggins' comments about building resilience, fostering resilience through this great work. So I appreciate it. And Dr. Ferguson will be on the call throughout. She can answer questions in the chat, and she'll be with us this entire time. Thank you. And now I'd like to go ahead and bring our first or our second guest, because Dr. Ferguson was our first guest, so to speak, but our next guest online. I'd like to go ahead and introduce Dr. Lane Soberhad. Are you there, Dr. Soberhad?
Yes, I am.
Yay! So welcome. And along with him is his colleague Emily Ruiz. If we could go ahead and bring Emily up as well. And then joining Emily will also be Joelle Lira from Communities and Schools of the South Plains. If we could bring all you guys all together. Thank you for joining us. How's the weather out in Lubbock? Are you guys doing pretty good out there?
Little stormy yesterday, nice and crisp today.
Nice and crisp today. All right. Well, we're thankful for you joining us. And I want to start off. We have about 20 minutes to kind of get a feeling for the work you're doing and the amazing initiative that you have. So I want to start off. Do you mind if I call you Lane? Would that be offensive if we use first names?
Lane is great.
Okay, thank you. Lane, if I could ask you, tell us a little bit about your program, your partners, this initiative, and kind of what you do and what everybody does and how this all comes together.
Sure. So my role with Lubbock ISD is the coordinator of research and innovation. My job in the district is basically to look for innovative or alternatively funded programs. So that ranges from anything from initiatives like the 21st Century Community Learning Center grant to partnerships with community-based organizations, colleges, universities, et cetera. So I'm sort of in the middle of all of these sorts of programs and projects that Lubbock ISD participates in. I also wanted to give the folks a little bit of context about the kind of community that Lubbock is, which I think will help set the stage for some of this stuff. So Lubbock is a city of around 300,000 people in West Texas. Lubbock ISD serves around 25,000 students across 45 campuses. We are about 75% economically disadvantaged. All but one of our 45 campuses are Title I campuses. And we are what most federal programs call a minority majority district. So we are about 2/3 Hispanic, about 14% Black, and about 20% white in our district. So we have a lot of needs in our community. Many of them center around access to opportunities. To set maybe a slightly larger context, Texas is also not seeing a funding increase for the per student allotment since 2019. And our insurance bill has increased by about 800% in the same time. So we are always on the lookout for new and exciting programs, especially if we can find a way to attach a few dollars to them, because we know our students and our families have those needs and we try and find ways to do them. So specifically with Texas ACE, we operate Texas ACE on 8 of our campuses, including all 4 of our alternative education programs. So that includes Priority Intervention Academy, which is our discipline referral campus, Dupree Learning Academy, which is our credit recovery campus for students who may need to retake a class, and that is also where we operate our district-run daycare for our students who are having children of their own. We operate Lubbock County's Juvenile Justice Alternative Education Program, not just for students in Lubbock ISD who have been expelled from their campus or the district, but for every district in Lubbock County that has expelled a student. We are the shared service provider for that, for those districts too. And in the same way, we also operate with Lubbock County, the Lubbock County Juvenile Justice Center. And we are the education provider for all students in Lubbock County that have been referred to the juvenile justice program there.
So you wear a lot of hats.
Yes.
Okay. Well, perfect. So share a little bit. So now that we have the context, and full disclosure to the audience, my own daughter lives out in Lubbock because you're also a college town, right?
Yes, we are also the home to Texas Tech University, which is about 90 seconds away from where I'm sitting right now.
So if I can trust my daughter, no, I'm just kidding. It's a great little town. I love it. My daughter lives up there. Lubbock is amazing, and you're doing some amazing work, like you said, with the various centers that you focus on, but specifically with your juvenile justice center. Can I ask you a question? Like, for those on the line who are curious, if an initiative did come through a grant program like this, how do you get like something like a Texas ACE and the Department of Justice and the school district and faith-based and community-based organizations? How do you bring all this together to support applying for a grant like this, going after a grant, and then more importantly, implementing it? I mean, that's huge.
So our district motto is to develop, nurture, and inspire every child every day. And so what our superintendent has asked us to do whenever we have an idea to do something new is always ask ourselves, how does this help kids? How does this help our teachers? How does this help our families? And so as long as we are kind of keeping that as our North Star, our board of trustees and our superintendent has kind of allowed us flexibility to do new and interesting things. In addition to that, Lubbock ISD is kind of one of those cornerstone entities in communities like ours. We also have long-standing relationships with basically every nonprofit in the area. So one of those, and Joel is here as the representative for his entity, Communities and Schools of the South Plains. Communities and Schools is in every single one of Lubbock ISD's schools. All 45 of our schools, we have a Communities and School Site Coordinator.
Wow.
And those folks help refer students and families to social services to connect them with other services provided through other nonprofits like United Way, the Food Bank, SNAP, South Plains Community Food Bank, SNAP, or whatever other community services that student might need. They also provide additional counseling and mental health support for students. So they have a dedicated caseload that they work with. Because as you may have in your own state, there is a teacher shortage and professional educator shortage in general. So that includes counselors, other mental health professionals, social workers, and et cetera, that school districts typically employ. So Communities and Schools has been essential for us in continuing to provide students with services that not only that they need, but that they deserve to have available to them.
And so that, first of all, that's amazing. And I know you said Joel's here, obviously, from Communities and Schools. And Emily from Lubbock ISD also works kind of coordinating all this together. You guys have been able to put together some pretty cool things, though. Beside the fact that you're embedded in all 45 campuses, you're also doing, some very interesting things with this juvenile justice alternative education program. Could you share whether Lane, it's you or Joel or Emily, whomever would like to jump in? Could you tell us a little bit about that? Because I think it's really unique, isn't it?
Sure. So, well, according to what Sarah Daly told me, I think currently we are the only Texas ACE program in the state that is operating at alternative education programs.
And Sarah's your state leader?
Yes, sir. That's correct.
Okay.
And so when we were writing the Texas ACE grant, we had that guiding question: what's the best way for us to help kids? As anybody who works in a school district can tell you, when COVID hit, we saw a rather precipitous rise in a number of concerning student behaviors. So for example, from 2020 to 2022, we saw a 100% increase in what we call assaultive behaviors. So that means students fighting each other. That means assaults on teachers. That means assaults by students outside of school, because that, engagement with law enforcement outside of the school day is going to affect their ability to participate during the school day. And that maybe they end up at the Lubbock County Juvenile Justice Center and we have to provide them education there instead. So that was the number one concern that we had, is we saw a very concerning increase in not only assaultive behaviors, but also drug use and drug distribution on campuses. So in the state of Texas, we consider those things mandatory referrals to things like PIA, our discipline referral campus, or to JJAEP, where a student is expelled formally from the district. Mm-hmm. And what that resulted in was PIA saw an increase in over 100% students referred there mandatorily by state statute. So that means we have to double the staff there. That also means that's double the number of students that are not in a general education environment that is going to best suit their educational needs for things like graduating from high school. So when we were looking for ways to support this, Texas ACE was at the top of our list. I don't think Lubbock ISD has participated in Texas. We're in cycle 11 for Candace's sake. But I don't think we have participated in Texas ACE since like cycle 5. So we haven't had a formal out of school program for a long time in Lubbock. And we knew the more that the kids were in our schools, and around adults who care about them, the better the outcomes were going to be for the students. So when the Texas ACE grant came up, that was the number one thing that was the superintendent told me, we will apply for this. We will include all of our alternative education campuses in this grant application.
Oh, wow. All of them.
So, yeah, all of them. So it was a specific directive there. In addition to that, we saw the highest increase in those concerning behaviors in middle schools specifically. And in one of our middle schools, they were, by a degree higher than every other middle school. And so their feeder elementary schools and that middle school were also included in our application. And the impact of Texas ACE was very immediate and very prominent. So we saw, for example, at that middle school, after year 2 of ACE, the number of students who were considered chronically absent at school dropped by 2/3.
Wait, can you say that again? The
number of students that were chronically absent at that middle school dropped by 2/3 by year 3 of Texas ACE.
That's a 67% improvement. That's amazing.
So grades didn't improve quite that much.
Sure.
They did go up. But the major discipline issues and behavior concerns that we had at that middle school, while they're still present, because kids are going to do what kids do, they are more in line with where the rest of our middle schools are now.
Wow.
And the only difference that has happened at that school has been ACE. And so we're attributing almost all of that to the impact of ACE and specifically the administrator and community support of the programs and projects that ACE is pursued at that campus.
That's amazing. I mean, I know because I know your background in evaluation and research and everything. I know it's correlation data that's driving that, but still, there's something there. That's amazing. In order to get that type of effect of increased attendance, and we know that over time, increased attendance in school does lead to improved grades and other improved behaviors. And the fact that you've been able to lower your discipline rate overall by doing this, you probably ran though with some bumps along the road from a administrative perspective, as far as like running the program, being able to get folks in there, and working with a community-based organization to do that. Would you or your partners here like to share any of the unique challenges that you might have faced, and how did you address them, and what advice would you give to anybody listening in if they wanted to do the same thing?
Sure. So I already mentioned we have a long-standing relationship with communities and schools. So when we were applying for the Texas ACE grant, we had two options. We could hire people ourselves to occupy the role of what we call site coordinators at these places with out-of-school programs, or we look at a community partner that could provide these staff for us. And at the time we were applying for the Texas ACE grant, we only had communities and schools in 37 of our 45 schools, but they were the obvious choice there. They were already connected with most of our families. They already knew how the district operated. And they had, most importantly, the trust of our board of trustees and the trust of the community that the communities they participated in. And so I want to turn it over to Joel for just a second so he can tell us a little bit more about how communities and schools works with our district in implementing this.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having us. We're very grateful to be a part of this networking group, and Dr. Sobrad just absolutely crushing it. So thank you so much for that. But the way we are able to work with the district, so like Dr. Sobrad said, we are in every Lubbock ISD campus. And one of the best things that kind of sets us up for success in ACE is in our alternative campuses, such as PIA, Dupree, and our Juvenile Justice Center. When our students are there, they have that support. They have the people on campus to be with them, to help them through conflict resolutions, to help them with getting grounded again. What's challenging for our kids is whenever they go back to their campuses. So the beauty of that is they have a communities in schools site coordinator who is at our traditional campuses. And so what we really try to put a big emphasis on is our students who are at our alternative campuses, whenever they are transitioning back to their campus, that they have someone there who will immediately reach out to them. Hey, how are you doing? Hey, what's your game plan for when you're back on campus? That way, we're always having conversations to keep them in that positive mindset. Now, they're kids, they have great days, just like me, right? I'm an adult. I have got good days and I have bad days. But they have someone on that campus who can help transition them back to their everyday life. And then that way they are set up for success. And like Dr. Sober had said, it's not just the kids too, it's the home life. And so that's one of the great things about Texas ACE is we put a huge emphasis on the family engagement component. And at all of our alternative campuses, that is something we do not just once a month, which is the requirement, but we try to do it multiple times throughout the month. That way we're building that relationship and that connectedness. So when they do go back, our CIS traditional coordinator can also connect with those families, because that's something we've also seen as well is some of these families, sometimes there's, you've got to break down some barriers. But at least if you can share, hey, I've spoke with this family, I know that this family or this traditional coordinator will help you. It really has gone a long way. So that's kind of how that partnership and our transition team has really we found kind of a niche right there, to be honest with you.
I love that. You hit on so many things that I wish we had like 6 hours to chat a little bit about this, because you touched on, not only the partnership of setting up communities in schools, working with Lubbock ISD leadership. Lane or Dr. Soberhead said, that the district administration was really bought in and kind of guided this. But you touched on this idea that when students who may be only a certain amount of time, 30 days or 60 days at a particular campus, when they finish that time frame and they go back to their campus, you've built a support system which helps foster that resilience and help drive that. I mean, because like you said, and I love how you say it, Joelle, I've never seen you have a bad day, but you've always seemed to be very chipper every time I've chatted with you. But we all have bad days. Kids do too, right? And so just having that shoulder to cry on. But I also like the fact that you brought in the family engagement piece, like, because there's also the time when they're away from us, and how can we support that? And I love that. And so you guys have so many things. We have about 2 minutes left. And so I wanted to ask the entire group, but I'm also going to kind of go off script and ask Emily to share a story. So we'll wrap this all in. But a couple of things I'd like to ask, for those on the line who are really thinking about, how did Lubbock do it and what could we do? Like, from a administrative perspective, district perspective, from a partnership perspective, but also from that bureaucratic perspective of, how do I get attendance for these kids to show that I'm living up to the grand expectations and things. Could you share that? And then Emily, could you wrap us up today? You have an amazing story about a student who grew a carrot. Could you share that story as we transition out? So advice and recommendations first, and then let's end on that carrot story if we could. Whoever would like to start.
Yeah, I think advice is just communication. I mean, I think that was the biggest thing early on is there's just so many different moving parts, specifically at the Lubbock Juvenile Justice Center. There's a lot of do's and you can and cannot do. It's not your typical facility where you can bring in a robot for a STEM program, right? You really have to get creative. You really have to think outside of the box. And that's something where from an administrative level, I think we've done a really good job as a team, but we've got amazing site supervisors as well who really go above and beyond to try to figure out how we can best serve our students, because that is a challenge in a detention facility, as you would imagine, because of the certain materials you can get in a facility like that. So that, for me at least, that was a challenge.
So number one tip is the most common question I get is, I want to help. I don't know who to call at the school district. So if I am that person for Lubbock ISD, and so if your school district does not have a person whose job it is to be the point of contact, to direct that community-based organization, that volunteer group, the university faculty, whoever it happens to be, designate someone as that person, because then everybody can refer those folks who want to help to the right person, and you can get traction. And that's how all of these programs start in our district, is they talk to me, I get them to the appropriate administrator so that we can get something going for our kids.
I think leading into the carrot story, one other partnership that we have worked hard to maintain, and like Joelle expressed, like getting supplies into a detention facility is difficult because you do have all those things. You don't think about, well, we're going to build a tower out of paper clips and popsicle sticks. Not at the detention facility. Have you counted all the popsicle sticks? Have you taken them back and recounted them to make sure that you have everything that you brought into the after school program? And so working together with Lubbock County to establish that relationship and build the trust there to say, hey, we're providing good quality programming to these students who otherwise would be sitting in their clusters every day after school, after their education's done, not being able to have that interaction with each other or with a positive adult in their life. And so one thing, Sean will go back to my carrot story, which I love, because before we built a new educational wing, or Lubbock County built a new educational wing, we did not have a place for the students to garden. And so the students would garden in their classrooms, and they had this little terracotta pot about this small. And the student, I walked in one day and I'm observing programming going on, and he pulled out this little bitty carrot. It was about this small. And he said, "Miss, look at this carrot I grew." And he was so proud of that carrot. He wanted to try it. He wanted to eat it. But I think when you look beyond the tiny little carrot that was his, it was his carrot. He grew that carrot. And when you are in a place where you don't really own anything anymore because you are in a locked down facility, this kid had that carrot. And so moving into their new educational wing, we've emphasized gardening with the students, and each cluster has a big metal tank in the middle courtyard, and they get to garden now so that their carrots aren't this tiny anymore. They can be this big. And so that's pretty neat. And that's one way, working together with communities and schools. Lubbock ISD, Lubbock County has been able to provide those experiences for those children.
Well, thank you so much. We could go on for, I know you have so many more stories, so many more things to share, and we could go on and talk, but let me just thank you for your time and for your advice and for your recommendations. For everybody on the line, I believe that we are going to stay in contact. Not I believe, I know we will stay in contact with Lubbock ISD and with CIS of the South Plains out there to share more about their unique partnership and how it was built upon. And in future webinars and future resources, we're going to expand upon the unique challenges that they face, ranging all the way from, how to get kids back to their home campus and have support, to what supplies, to staff development, and more. We are going to bring you back at the very end to kind of answer some last minute questions. But right now, Michelle, I think you have a guest all the way from Illinois, Chicago specifically, I believe, that you would like to introduce and kind of share some more.
I do, Sean. Thank you. And thank you to all of our guests before. That was really great. I love the carrot story. So everyone, I would love to introduce you to Leslie Rivers. And Leslie is Director of Community Schools. So we're talking about community schools and the Act Now program, which is after school for children and teens. So welcome, Leslie, all the way from Illinois. And thank you so much for being with us today to talk about your program and some of the things that you're doing. So I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about your program and maybe some of the various initiatives that you're working on.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm so glad to be here and share some of these stories and resources. I reached out to a lot of my colleagues that I work with and asked them to kind of dump on me a lot of different thoughts as it relates to this topic. And I wanted to start off by sharing a story from one of our partners, sort of ground us in how OST programs, specifically using these resources, can help communities. So this particular school-based after-school program was affected by the tragic loss of a student. And they partnered with the school counselors to offer structured one-on-one grief counseling sessions for affected students and trained program staff to facilitate group discussions around grief and loss. This was really great because it gave youth a safe space within their after-school program to process their emotions and support each other. And our partner program specifically emphasized that equipping the staff with those skills was essential, especially for youth who might not have other outlets to express their feelings. I think we all know that the barriers in OST, between staff and students tend to be a little lower than in school day programming. So it was really great to equip those after school staff with those tools. The program found that by fostering the supportive community within the program, the sense of empathy and connection extended beyond their doors, and it ended up reinforcing bonds across the school and the neighborhood.
I love that story, and it's near and dear to my heart being a former school counselor, because I do know how important it is to give them that space and also have that one-on-one time for kids that might not want to talk out loud about it. And then maybe once they feel more comfortable, then they will talk to their peers, about it. And it kind of, like you said, it expands way beyond just the program.
Yeah.
Thankfully.
Yeah.
So we understand that you're the statewide after-school network for Illinois. And so I just want to know, what exactly is a statewide after-school network?
Yeah, so we're act now as the Illinois branch of the 50 state after school network. So we have a counterpart in every state. We focus just on Illinois. And our mission and the mission of networks across the country is to ensure that all youth across their state have access to high quality and accessible after school, and we add community school programs. So again, every network tends to do this primarily through advocacy to legislators for supportive policies. We know that high quality after school programs cannot exist without supportive policies. Yeah, Idaho, I see you in the chat. We know that legislators need to have these policies. You need to have funding. So the state networks do a lot of policy and advocacy work on behalf of after school programs. We also offer a ton of free professional development tools and resources for the field. And in Illinois specifically, we provide targeted technical assistance to after school and community school providers.
Thanks, Leslie. And that is near and dear to our heart at NTAC also, because we love that professional development piece and also targeted technical assistance for all of our programs, just ensuring that they do have the tools that they need. Mm-hmm. So does every state have one? I saw Illinois or Idaho come on, so we know that they have one.
Yes, every state has one. So if you aren't connected to your statewide network, I strongly encourage you. That can be one thing that you take away. It's an easy to do as soon as you log off of this webinar. They are a wealth of knowledge and support.
Thanks, Leslie. So yeah, so she said, just log on and find out who your people are. And it is different. The state networks kind of sometimes are different in each state as to what they do and what kind of support they provide. But I think overall, it's really great, like Leslie said, to connect with them and kind of see what is going on. All right, Leslie. So how do you focus on impactful collaboration as a network in coordination with various state support agencies? And we're thinking community-based organizations, faith-based organizations. And specifically, how do you help organizations with safety planning and general prevention and intervention?
Yeah, so one awesome thing that we have in Illinois is the statewide quality after school standards. So a lot of different states have this. We worked with Indiana and based ours off of theirs. I know California also has some after school quality standards. essentially we sat down and we were like, no one defined this is what makes a high quality after school program. So through a lot of research and collaboration and best practices, we wrote up these standards. Includes a variety of core areas and indicators within those core areas so that programs can do a self-evaluation to see where they are at. So for helping programs prepare for safety, we have a program standard that says youth are carefully supervised to maintain safety, and there are clear protocols for responding to emergency situations. So we have a variety of indicators within that standard, such as outlining emergency procedures, systems to protect youth from harm, strategies for supervision, protocols for arriving to programming and leaving programming, and how you notify families of issues. And the cool thing about how we train programs is then every time we have an indicator, we have resources attached with that to help programs prepare. So our quality standards manager, Jackie, literally just copied and pasted the resources for me to share on things that we do to help programs with those indicators.
Well, that's great. And I'm sure with those statewide quality standards, it's easier when you're working with other community-based and faith-based organizations to be able to show them, you know, this is exactly what we're working towards, and kind of then they can see where they fall into those different indicators.
Yeah.
All right. So could you elaborate on other programs you collaborate with within the school community? For example, you're the director of full service community schools. We heard from Joel, who was working in his full service community school in Texas, and how full service community school based coordinators serve as kind of that bridge between 21st century programs and the school community. How are they connecting that? And how does this role enhance support for students? I'd say particularly in addressing issues that we're talking about today, as far as community violence and also trauma. And then we're also looking at what ways has the collaboration that you talk about proved to be a best practice in fostering the things that we're looking for as far as safe, responsive, and also connected environments among our programs.
Yeah, so the big advantage for full service community schools, it's a requirement to have what we call a community school coordinator in every school. Sometimes they're called resource coordinators or community school managers. They have different titles, but essentially it is a person who is housed in the school building, who is the strategic partner between the school and all the other things that happen within the school. So after school programs, any other health partnerships, family engagement, all of those things. This person is the strategic planner for those things. So whenever possible, we also encourage 21st century site coordinators to also be housed in the building. I think being able to go to work in the school has such a huge impact and really helps in aiding consistent communication and connecting with school day teachers and staff and aligning all of the policies and the procedures between school day and after school. Sort of along those same lines, we love to see when community schools and 21st century programs adopt the same data tracking, safety, and communication protocols that schools have already established. And especially when you think of it from the perspective of a student or a family, you know, they send their kids to school, the kid goes to school, they stay there from 9 to 5. They're not necessarily aware that it's a different program or a different partnership coming in at that 3 to 6 hour. So as much as you can maintain consistency across the day is really helpful for students and families. And staff, we know a lot of times school day teachers will stay after and they will also provide support in those after school programs. I would say that one of the most successful models of the school day and after school collaboration is when school administrators include these coordinators in planning meetings. So especially you want to be in on those meetings where folks are analyzing the school day data. So for example, things like pre and post assessments, feedback from students, teacher feedback, progress reports, etc., all of those things. In Illinois, we see this more often in smaller communities just because of the nature of collaborative efforts in more rural areas. But we've really seen that it makes a substantial difference in building the capacity of both school day and after school initiatives when those after school program coordinators have a seat at the planning table and can influence decision making.
So you brought something up that I look back from when I was a classroom teacher, and I worked in a 21st century program, and I was able to have a little bit more of, a smaller group or be one-on-one even with my own students, and be able to connect with those families. And you brought up how important it is to have kind of that school-wide, like from the minute they get there until the minute they leave, no matter who is overseeing and supervising. And I think that that's really important. Many schools do that with like school-wide behavior, management plans, or also, how important it is for students that if they're doing a tornado drill during the school day, that's how they know how to do it.
Day
And
one.
so we want to do that in the after school too, and not change it, especially with the little ones. They'll be like, what's going on? So
They don't know.
such a big
I would add to social emotional learning, SEL curriculum. If there's something that the school day has adopted, that's what they use for their SEL curriculum, we love to see that echoed in the after school area as well.
That's awesome. So you have the School and Community Partnership Toolkit at Act Now. So tell us more about this resource that you created. And we know that there's 4 phases. I was going through it. There's 4 different phases through it. And also share resources or strategies from the toolkit. We want to know kind of what's the most valuable thing. I mean, sometimes you can open a toolkit and you're like, oh, it's so long, or it's so big, or where do I go? And so if you had to give, just some suggestions, what do you feel that is most valuable?
Yeah, so this is one of my favorite resources that we've ever created. And I know we've talked a lot about partnerships. I think that might be one of the subtitles of this webinar today, but having strong community partnerships between CBOs and the schools is crucial for success in this. So I want to give a shout out to my colleague, Nikki Galani, who really made this toolkit happen. I think everyone loves the idea of partnerships between schools and community-based organizations, but you named it, Michelle. Sometimes just thinking about starting that process and how to move through it with fidelity can be really challenging. So the way she set up this toolkit is that it's literally a step-by-step guide to that process. And she includes a wide variety of templates and resources and other tools that programs can use. And so it's got these 4 phases, and it's a toolkit that I think is really helpful if you go through it from start to finish. I'd say if you're really advanced in your partnership, that you might be able to jump around and like pick and pull some things apart. But I think the way she lays out how to have a successful partnership and how to continue to let it grow and mature, it's best to kind of start at the beginning and see how she lays this whole process out. Some of the resources in there that I think are really helpful are the needs assessment. And I think she has an asset map too with the needs assessment. But if you're looking to build these partnerships, you need to understand what need you're filling in the first place. You don't want to duplicate efforts across the school and across your after school program. So this needs assessment template really lets you kind of outline, taking into consideration feedback from your students, from your families, from your staff. What are the real needs, and how can I find an organization that can offer a service that matches up with those needs? And then, of course, the asset maps too. If there's something that already exists that you can take advantage of, you should definitely be doing that. The other resource that I really love are the sample memorandums of understanding. We often call these MOUs. I think a lot of times we engage in these partnerships that are pretty informal. You talk on the phone or you exchange a couple of emails, they drop in every once in a while. And while those are great starts, I think formalizing those relationships really helps clarify roles and responsibilities and expectations. So we strongly encourage folks to have those MOUs between your partners, whether it's a school and a CBO, faith-based organization, whatever it is. And the other one, the last sort of resource that I think is really important are the strategies for continuous quality improvement of your partnership. So you don't want to just, sign the MOU and start your partnership and be like, okay, great, everything's awesome. You want to be continuously looking at it and thinking about, okay, are we meeting those deliverables we outlined in the MOU? How satisfied are everyone with these? What other things can we do to improve? And I think almost most importantly, is this an effective partnership? And if not, how should we change or modify it?
Yeah. And I love the memorandum of understanding because I'm just like you, where I feel like, yes, you do make those partnerships, We talk about, the needs that we can fill for each other. It may happen with 21st century programming and community schools, like what can we do to where we're not reinventing the wheel or overlapping efforts. And that can really be a good guide as to what everybody's responsibilities are, what they said they would do, like you said, just for that continuous improvement, looking back and saying, oh, well, this worked, but this didn't. And how can we tweak it and move forward in our partnership? And at NTAC, we are excited about our partnerships. We are very excited about how we can take resources and share them with all of our sites and schools and programs. So we're not reinventing the wheel. All right, so for LEAs and non-LEAs, like faith-based organizations and community-based organizations, and maybe others that are considering developing similar preparedness resources, I can't speak. What advice would you give them for establishing an effective school community partnership?
Yeah, I think the first thing, the key, is to find out who is making those decisions during the school day and build your relationship with that person. It's not always the principal, right? And sometimes the principal's email inbox is completely flooded and they're never going to see that. So go down the list, look at people's titles, talk to families and students, find out who makes those decisions and start building your inroads with that person. The other thing that I think is super important is to learn the systems and protocols that are already in place and adopt them to your program. I think we're really familiar in the after school realm that a lot of tools and resources are made for the school day. They're not necessarily made specifically for our after school programming. So you might have to make some adjustments. You might have to adopt or change some things, but as much consistency as you can keep for the kids and for families between school day and after school is really helpful. Plus, it demonstrates your buy-in to the school, right? Like you want to be on board, you want to be a partner with them. And then finally, join those school day teams that analyze the data and make those decisions. After school, we see a lot of things in after school. You're a huge part of these kids' lives, and we want to make sure you're at the table.
And I love that. The school day teams are really important. I know our school improvement plan teams and all of those in my district, we really try to connect everyone, and it might not be you're at every meeting, but you're at the meeting that is relevant to the work you're doing in your partnership. Also, something that you brought up is about, sharing resources and also, learning what protocols are in place as far as, what's already happening and how can we adopt them. And that's something that's happening a lot with the resources that we find, especially in community violence prevention and intervention, is a lot of them are directed towards the school day or towards the district. And so you made a really great point that you might just have to, tweak it a little bit, change a little bit of the language, because out of school time can be different, but it's still, like you said, it's the same students, it's the same families that we're supporting. And so we might have to change the language a little bit, and it might not be directly the way it's written for schools, but the information, the resource, all of it can really be adapted and used in our after school programs. So I want to thank you so much, Leslie, for being here today and bringing all of this information to us, communities and schools, the statewide networks, and also just a lot of these different tips that you're giving us as far as how we can all work together. No matter what your program is, no matter what your role is, that we all do have the same children from morning until evening, and keeping it as consistent as possible for them and their families, I think will make a big impact. So thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right, Sean, I'm going to send it back over to you.
Yeah, wow. Well, you ever do these webinars and you're like, gosh, if I could just have like one more hour, I could get that one point out, right? But we appreciate everybody on the line and all of our guests. It has been an absolute a great time. We've had a few questions in the chat room that if we don't necessarily get to specifically here, we will make sure that they're included in our recap. But we do want to just briefly highlight one, and that was, we had a question brought up a little bit about some funding So Dr. Sobrad Lane put in the chat kind of Lubbock ISD strategy. Leslie, if you have a chance and want to throw into the chat kind of some high level strategies, funding is always its own topic and can take a life of its own. But thank you so much. What a great, I've learned so much all the way from Lubbock ISD, all the way back to Dr. Scroggins giving us our marching orders, so to speak, to look at fostering resilience, all the way to Candace and her experience as a national leader, driving it from the days when she worked in juvenile justice all the way to where she is today, and how to get that rolling, to Lubbock ISD's getting the partnerships going, building up that momentum of drawing everybody together. And Leslie, your information about the State After School Network, about Act Now, and the work that you've done to really bring it all home and to really capture in a methodology, so to speak, to keep this intervention and prevention strategies moving. That is so great. But Michelle, there are some national technical assistance centers who also focus on this work, and I think we're going to bring them into our series. But there's one that we have up on screen right now that I'd like you to share a little bit more, if you could.
Sure, thanks, Sean. So yeah, as Sean said, we're going to work with this National Technical Assistance Center throughout our series. And the first one that we're talking about today is REMS, which is Readiness and Emergency Management for Schools Technical Assistance Center. It's a mouthful. And so REMS is good. And so what REMS does is it provides key resources for emergency planning, and they tailor these resources for schools and out of school time programs. And so quickly, I'll just talk about the wheel that you kind of see here. These are 5 preparedness missions to assist schools and out of school time programs to recover from emergencies. And so you'll see prevention. And prevention is the action that schools and districts and programs can take to prevent a threat or an actual incident from occurring. The second one is mitigation. And through this, it focuses on actions schools, districts, and programs can take to eliminate or reduce the loss of life, injuries, and property. Third being protection. Is the ongoing actions that are taken to safeguard schools, students, and staff from an emergency event. And then response is putting the schools and school districts plans into place so that we can effectively respond to emergency events. So, you know, what does that look like as far as the immediate needs of students and staff as we respond to events? And then the 5th one, recovery. And this is teaming up with community partners to restore educational programming, the physical environment, business operations, social and emotional behavior health. And both sets of our guests really touched on this, you know, what that looks like in the recovery efforts. And so I think we threw a link in the chat for one of the REMS resources. So now I'm going to pass it back over to you, Sean, and maybe you can share a few examples of how we keep programs safe and responsive.
Perfect. You know, I think everything that we've talked about today, as far as, you know, definitely focused on the partnership piece, but as we look at applying these prevention strategies in our out of school time programs, I think it's on us as a community of individuals who work in this critical field to really highlight our practical strategies and our resources that we have. And it's about sharing with each other. It's about sharing these stories, letting Lubbock ISD and communities and schools work, letting Act Now's work, and specifically the work that Leslie and her team's doing directly, sharing those stories with each other. That's one of the ways that we can apply, because what works over here may work over there. And building on what Candace said, Dr. Ferguson says, as we work on that, we draw upon that experience and we take it with us no matter where we go. 10 years from now, we may be in a different role that we can impact something else later. And I think as we really work with our state education agencies, our 21st century programs, our other after-school professionals like the state after-school networks, and all of the centers designed to help kids in general, bringing it all together will help us apply these strategies. And one way that we're doing that is by this series. So again, we have 6 various webinars. This was our first launch. We have another one coming in January. We're working with REMS to get a date hammered out for everybody, and we'll get that out as fast as we get that date hammered out. But we really want to look at the physical safety and the safety planning, the techniques for how do we secure our OST spaces? Is it okay because I don't have a key to the building to use a brick to keep that door open? No, it's not. So how do we mitigate that though? Because we also want people to, not be locked out of the school either, if they're a teacher. So we have lots of thoughts in that second webinar coming up. We have, as you can see, 4 more aligned, but we do just have about 1 minute apiece to ask our guests. So we do want to just bring them back real quick onto the screen. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing real quick. And as hopefully everybody can see kind of the Brady Bunch outline here of our whole group. But we have a question here. This is for Lubbock ISD and CIS. So this is kind of for you guys. How do you approach, and you have like a minute, how do you approach planning for emergencies? I mean, in your experience, is it even worth planning for, or do you just react? Any thoughts?
So proactivity prevents reactivity, meaning the more proactive we are in our planning, the less likelihood we actually have to react to a crisis. And if we do, we're ready for it. So state of Texas has all sorts of requirements for during the school day, and we align those exactly with the expectations for our Texas ACE program. So our beginning, middle, during the year safety training, all of our CIS coordinators attend the same training all of our other staff does. The drills that we run after school are the exact same drills we run during the school day. I think we have 7 or 8 different drills we run throughout the year, unfortunately. But Texas ACE runs all of the exact same drills. They have walkie-talkies, they have badges to scan into our schools. They sign in the same way, they sign out the same way. So everything is exactly aligned. So Leslie brought that up earlier. So just want to emphasize that.
Wonderful, thank you. Any maybe 10 seconds or 15-second thoughts from Joelle or Emily? Anything you want to add to that? Are you shaking your hand? You're like, no, that was it. So the big tip there that I took away, the main thing I love, and this is going to become my soundbite, proactivity prevents reactivity. That's going to be my new phrase. So I'm stealing that from you. Michelle, I'm going to turn it over to you to ask the final question to Leslie.
Okay, thanks, Sean. So Leslie, in your work, do you see any emerging trends or new challenges in community violence prevention and intervention? Are OST programs considering future planning? Like, what are you seeing through the statewide network or even in your work with Act Now?
Yeah, I think a big trend we're seeing is sustainability of after-school programs. How do we continue to fund these? How do we support a workforce that is constantly under capacity and undervalued? And that is one of the jobs of the state networks, to be really proactive so that we're not reacting to when we have these funding cliffs. But yeah, I think it's important for after-school programs to think long-term sustainability. What are you doing to support your staff? What are you doing to, ensure that your funding goes beyond the next grant cycle? Because by allowing to do that, you can set up those consistent systems and structures for your students, your families, and your community.
Thanks, Leslie. I think we're gonna have to make a meme or something with this new saying so we can share it countrywide.
That is so true. We are. So as we have about 1 minute, we do have our end survey in the chat. So if you could please take our end survey, we really do use feedback to improve. It's not just something that we do just to collect data. We actually analyze it and we sit around, and Dr. Ferguson makes us listen and abide by it and change. So we're definitely wanting to do that. Speaking of Dr. Ferguson, as we put up our call to action on the screen here for everybody, Dr. Ferguson, we want to hand it over to you to kind of give us some final thoughts, and then we'll share how people can get in communication with us.
Yeah, no, I think this was fantastic, especially as you mentioned, just as our very first in the series, because this is, as we said, we want this to be foundational. We have to give you a little bit of the information of, how we get started, and that is through partnerships, as you heard people say today. And then, of course, realizing that there is an organization, there may just be one in Texas, but that is doing this successfully. And we want to highlight that and bring that to your attention in future series. So thank you all so much for your participation today. We do definitely want to continue staying connected with you. So Sean's going to share with you how you can do that, so that you can just stay informed with us and make sure that you come back for the additional webinars in the series.
So thank you, everybody. As you can see up on the screen, you can see our website, our email, our newsletter. You can reach us on X. You can reach us on LinkedIn. We're out in the States. We're out in programs. If you see anybody with a shirt that says Intact, that's who we are. Just stop us and say, hey, I want to ask you this question. We appreciate the comments, Steve and Rhonda and Debbie and everybody who's been commenting, Beth, everybody who's been coming in the chat. Thank you. Big kudos to our producer, Dave, for making this such a smooth experience. To Michelle, my co-host here, for being so amazing. To Dr. Ferguson, to our team from Love ISD and CIS, to our team from Act Now, and of course, Dr. Scroggins, who kicked us off. It's been a great day. We hope that you have an amazing, what is today? Today's Tuesday. Like an amazing Tuesday and a happy holiday season as you're coming up. We will see you in the next webinar. Michelle, anything from you before we close out?
Yeah. I just want to thank everyone for being here. It was great to hear from all of our guests. And also, like you said in the chat, we shared some, folks shared some really, really great information. So thank you.
All right, everybody, be safe and thank you very much. We'll see you next time.